Well, good afternoon, and welcome to Summarizing Approaches for Designing Inclusive Apprenticeship Programs. We're delighted you're here with us today. I'm Zach Bourne. I'm with the Urban Institute, where we're building research and tools to create a more modern, robust, and inclusive registered apprenticeship system. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, we've provided ASL translation and cart captioning. You can adjust your caption settings with the Show Captions button. The event will be recorded and the recording will be posted online afterward. Speaker biographies and related materials are also available online at urban.org. And all participants today are going to be muted. You can type your questions and comments into the Q&A box at any time. But we won't have an opportunity, unfortunately, to take live questions today, but we'll be sure to answer them after the webinar. And of course, you can engage with us online. You can use the hashtag #liveaturban. Lastly, we have a survey, and so take a minute or two to complete the survey at the end of the event. So if you're not familiar with Urban Institute, we're a national social and economic policy research organization. We've been bringing evidence to policy for more than 50 years. And we're still elevating the debate today, including on how to support businesses and workers in meeting a changing labor market, changing economic landscape, as well as societal changes. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization that believes decisions are shaped by facts. And those have the power to improve public policy practice, strengthen communities, and transform people's lives for the better. We're thrilled that you're joining us today for a discussion and presentation on inclusive apprenticeships. If you know Urban's history, you know we've had a long history in researching apprenticeships and implementing what works. We've contributed to America's expansion of registered apprenticeship, to modernize the system through groundbreaking research, program evaluation, and the development of national occupational infrastructure. And we've also built high-quality registered apprenticeship programs with employers. And all of this work is supported through the U.S. Department of Labor and research, and and also through private philanthropy. We're thankful for ODEP's investment in the research today and the presentation, and to include what we know on inclusive apprenticeships. Over the last few years, Urban's apprenticeship work has included a lot of interfacing with employers, both large and small. We've built upon our knowledge and resources we can bring to bear. In recent years, a key component of apprenticeship and its expansion has been increasing the diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as accessibility. Historically, apprenticeship programs in the U.S. have displayed significant racial and gender disparities and have not always created the space for disabled workers to succeed in apprenticeship. While some progress has been made, in part due to expanding the types of apprenticeships that are available, and a greater emphasis on accessibility, it's certainly not enough. Much more is going to be required of us to improve the system and make sure that it's more accessible to disabled people. Urban has contributed to greater inclusivity in apprenticeship, specifically by producing a comprehensive study about the landscape of inclusive apprenticeships in the U.S. We've developed and delivered trainings to states on modern equal employment opportunity practices, and making the case for greater diversity and inclusion through a variety of research, publications, events, and even direct engagement with employers. As many of you know, apprenticeship extends far beyond the traditional construction and building trades, but it goes to advanced manufacturing, IT, healthcare, energy, climate resilience. It should be noted, though, that construction apprenticeship remains a core sector and represents about half the system. So it's important to understand the industry context for how policymakers can ensure a more inclusive registered apprenticeship system. Despite the growth of registered apprenticeships over the past decade and their use in emerging industries, as well as construction and manufacturing, they remain underused, but an effective workforce training program that supports entry into good jobs and careers. With that in mind, we turn to inclusivity in apprenticeships, the employers and sponsors that offer apprenticeships, and what we know about apprenticeships and what we know works. Today's webinar showcases key findings from our project with the Office of Disability Employment Policy for building inclusive apprenticeships. We'll explore a diverse ecosystem of partners that can support employers and apprenticeship sponsors at every stage, from design to recruitment, engagement, and completion. Today, we'll hear from some of our partners, including sponsors of registered apprenticeship programs and government partners that can facilitate, support, and fund inclusive apprenticeships. With that, I'd like to turn to Taryn Williams. She's the Assistant Secretary for the Disability Employment Policy Office at the U.S. Department of Labor, and to provide her opening remarks. Welcome, Assistant Secretary.
Thank you for that introduction, and welcome everyone to today's webinar on inclusive apprenticeship programs. As you heard, I am Taryn Williams, and I have the privilege of serving as Assistant Secretary of Labor for Disability Employment Policy. And in that role, I lead our Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP for short. For a visual description, I am a Black woman with shoulder-length curly hair wearing a burgundy sweater and a print scarf. And ODEP is focused on creating equitable and inclusive pathways to employment for all Americans with disabilities. We've done this through several investments, working on expanding access to inclusive apprenticeships, and most recently through our Partnership for Inclusive Apprenticeship Project, or PIA, as we call it. I want to start by saying thank you to the Urban Institute team for organizing this event, and to all of you in the audience for attending today. Today's webinar aims to unite two big topics: program design and inclusive apprenticeships. These topics are incredibly important to us here at ODEP. We are committed to creating equitable and inclusive pathways to employment for all of our nation's workers, especially those with disabilities and intersectional identities. Over the last 12 months, the labor force participation rate for working age people with disabilities is 41%, compared to 78% for those without disabilities. However, by ensuring that inclusive program design is applied to registered apprenticeships, we can work to further narrow that gap. Closing that gap begins with having better data. And that means improving self-identification of disability status for those in apprenticeship programs. Disability status appears to be substantially underreported at around 1%. We know that people with disabilities should feel comfortable disclosing their status without fear of negative repercussions. And to this end, ODEP also has a toolkit to support self-disclosure through our Employer Assistance and Resource Network Technical Assistance Center, also known as EARN, and that can be found at askearn.org. It's also important to collect disability status comprehensively for all participants in apprenticeship programs, so we can understand how to better recruit, retain, and advance apprentices with disabilities. But first, we need to ensure that people can access these apprenticeship programs without barriers. As Acting Secretary Sue says often, registered apprenticeships are the superhighways of our workforce system, so it's critical that we make them accessible. And by developing inclusive apprenticeship programs, we can provide new careers to job seekers with disabilities. Registered apprenticeship programs are a powerful tool capable of effectively growing the American workforce where growth is needed most. Research shows that after about 5 years of using registered apprenticeship programs, companies often see a 144% return on investment. But we know it doesn't just benefit employers. Apprentices earn money while they learn in-demand skills, they receive mentorship, and they gain critical credentials that jumpstart their careers and lead to good jobs. Apprenticeship programs that include people with disabilities benefit everyone by creating a more inclusive and diverse workforce. While you listen to today's speakers, please keep in mind that this project is producing briefs and reports that will help inform our office moving forward. I want to again thank you for attending today's event and helping ODEP continue to empower our nation's workers and ensure that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, or DEIA, is at the heart of everything we do. I'll now turn it, I think, back over to Daniel. Thank you, everyone.
Right. Thank you. My name is Daniel Keene, and describe myself. I'm a white male with short brown hair, and today I'm wearing a white shirt. And I think I need the slides to advance. I want to start by talking about the study's goals and the data collection that we conducted for this study. We're going to be talking today about ODEP's research to support the Partnership on Inclusive Apprenticeship Project. And the goals of this study were to understand the inclusive apprenticeship models that are already being implemented as a part of PIA and other apprenticeship programs, describe how they're designed to be inclusive of people with disabilities, and learn about different advice and experiences that those programs have had that other employers and apprenticeship programs can learn from to develop inclusive apprenticeship programs. This research project depended on several different data sources. We did a review of the literature. We conducted discussions with inclusive apprenticeship partners, 18 in total. And we also conducted an online survey of inclusive apprenticeship partners with 34 completed surveys total. And finally, we analyzed the Registered Apprenticeship Partners Information Data System, which is the national data system for registered apprenticeship programs. So what we discussed today is going to be derived from these different data sources. Our agenda for today is to start by defining registered apprenticeship and inclusive apprenticeship to make sure everybody understands the sorts of programs that we'll be talking about, and then discuss trends in the proportion of apprentices who self-identify as having a disability. Then I'm going to turn to Karen. She's going to discuss the apprenticeship ecosystem and inclusive apprenticeship and what that means at each stage of the apprenticeship system. We're going to hear from 2 ecosystem partners and then share where to find additional information from this project. So I'm going to start to make sure everybody understands what a registered apprenticeship program is and what makes apprenticeship inclusive. This slide shows a picture first of 2 colleagues working and discussing work on a tablet. And a registered apprenticeship program is training that's provided in a work environment. So programs provide paid on-the-job learning and also related instructions, sometimes with a training partner or college partner in an occupation. And the purpose is to foster skills for the apprentice and earn industry-recognized credential. All apprenticeship programs that are registered have to adhere to guidelines and standards for registration that lay out the on-the-job learning and the related instruction that happens on the program. And they're registered either with the Federal Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeship or with a state apprenticeship agency. So what makes an apprenticeship inclusive? Well, first, it has to have all the elements of a registered apprenticeship program that I just discussed. It has to include on-the-job learning, it has to be paid, and it has to include related instruction. But inclusive apprenticeship programs also need to be intentionally designed to support access and completion for apprentices with disabilities and for anybody from any background to ensure that they can succeed in the apprenticeship program. So every apprenticeship program is going to be designed a little different depending on the job and on the apprenticeship standards, but promising practices for inclusive apprenticeship program that we've seen among operating programs are universal design for learning, which is providing a flexible learning environment so that all apprentices can succeed, and providing accessible workplace technology and accommodations, any accommodations that apprentices may need to be retained and succeed and progress in the apprenticeship program. Another key promising practice for inclusive apprenticeship programs is training and technical assistance to the employers themselves, workplace personnel, mentors, and any other trainers involved in the apprenticeship program so that they understand how to provide inclusive training. And then finally, we found across all inclusive apprenticeship programs that partnerships are very essential to promoting inclusive apprenticeship and providing these supports. So all that having been said, as Taryn had mentioned, we still see challenges to expanding inclusive apprenticeship programs and fully including apprentices with disability in apprenticeship programs. So some of the challenges that we've run across in our interviews and the surveys are a simple lack of awareness of apprenticeship as a training model. Many employers don't understand apprenticeship training, and so they don't establish inclusive apprenticeship programs. But they also don't consider inclusive talent in hiring. They don't change their hiring practices to generate inclusive apprenticeship programs, or they believe that simple anti-discrimination practices and basic adherence to the law is sufficient to make an apprenticeship program inclusive in a place where all apprentices can succeed. Apprentices themselves may not know how to self-identify. They may not know how to request accommodations, and this can be a barrier. And when programs are designed, when the on-the-job learning is designed and the related instruction is designed, they may be designed without inclusion in mind. All right. And before moving into the data, I want to say a little bit about the legal and regulatory context for inclusive apprenticeship programs. Title I of the American Disability Act requires that all Americans with 15 or more employees provide reasonable accommodations during the hiring process and on the job. Since every apprenticeship program has to partner with an employer to provide paid on-the-job training, the Americans with Disability Act would apply to all employers involved in apprenticeship programs with 15 or more employees. In addition to the ADA, in 2016, there were revisions to the National Apprenticeship Act EEO regulations that added a new prohibition of discrimination in registered apprenticeship programs based on disability status. These 2016 revisions also incorporated a possibility for apprentices to self-identify, which is what I'll be moving into in the next section. So now I'm going to discuss trends in apprenticeship self-identification of disability and what we know about how many apprentices self-identify as having a disability. So in 2017, the voluntary disability disclosure form was introduced, and it's for program sponsors to invite apprentices to self-identify at multiple points during the apprenticeship program whether they have a disability. So they have to provide the opportunity to self-identify at the application stage and then annually during the apprenticeship program. There's an aspirational goal that the Office of Apprenticeship has that at least 7% of registered apprentices are individuals who identify as having a disability with Form 671. And this self-identification requirement and the goal applies to programs with at least 5 apprentices. There are small apprenticeship programs with only a few apprentices, and then there are also very large apprenticeship programs, and the requirement to distribute the form is only for those with 5 or more apprentices. Collection of this data is important, we think, because you can't track progress in apprenticeship programs or understand the extent of inclusive apprenticeship programs without knowing how many disabled apprentices are in the apprenticeship system. And I include a quote here from Bonnie Swenner of the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine that without data, opportunities to address inequities and social justice are erased. So we believe these data are very important, and it helps us understand the progress of inclusive apprenticeship in the system. On this slide, I'm including a picture of the voluntary disclosure form itself. And the voluntary disclosure form has three basic sections to it. The first section asks the apprentice to check one of the boxes, yes, that I have a disability, no, I don't have a disability, or I don't wish to answer that question. The next section of the form explains why they're being asked to complete the form in the interest of the Department of Labor and the Office of Apprenticeship in collecting this information. And then the third section of the form is titled, How Do I Know If I Have a Disability? And it lists a number of potential disabilities that the respondent to the form can consider, examples that are provided in the form itself. This is the current version of the form, and I'm going to be discussing in a little while updates to this form and alternative forms that other federal agencies use. On this slide, I have a graph charting the number of registered apprentices who've self-identified as having a disability from fiscal year 2017, when the form was introduced, through fiscal year 2024. And so in fiscal year 2017, it starts at only 491 registered apprentices self-identifying as having a disability. This was in the first year that the form was available. In fiscal year 2024, 6,805 registered apprentices self-identified as having a disability. This was at a total population of 641,000 active registered apprentices in fiscal year 2024. In the majority of those, 325,000 provided some disability status, but many didn't even provide disability status. So if you do the division, this is, as Taryn mentioned, only a little over 1% of apprentices self-identifying as having a disability in fiscal year 2024. This is obviously far below the aspirational goal of 7%, although it's also been increasing every year. So one of the questions that we consider is, why is this self-reported disability so far below the aspirational goal? One reason may be that apprenticeship programs aren't sufficiently inclusive or accessible at the moment to reach the aspirational goal, but there's still progress that we need to make in expanding inclusive apprenticeship. Another important consideration is that on the form that I had shared previously, non-response is an option. 41% of apprentices in 2022 did not provide their status on the form. And then finally, apprentices might be suspicious about the form itself and how the information on the form will be used. There's a related study by Kaylin Duncan and Patricia Sias on the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs disclosure form, which isn't exactly the same, but it's similar to the Office of Apprenticeship form. And they found that 58% of individuals surveyed thought that that form would be used to reduce the number of people with disabilities hired. So the surveyed population and the form aren't exactly the same as the Office of Apprenticeship form, but it's still a sobering statistic that this might be a concern in the apprenticeship system as well. On this slide, I have another graph, and it has 20 different bars on it for apprenticeship programs of different sizes. So I have a bar for all apprenticeship programs that have 1 apprentice, 2 apprentices, and so on, up to apprenticeship programs with 20 active apprentices. The bars for programs that are required to use the voluntary disclosure form are colored yellow, and the bars representing the programs with 4 or fewer apprentices that are not required to use the voluntary disclosure form are blue. And one of the things that we see when we look at programs of different sizes is that the requirement to invite apprentices to disclose their disability are not a strong factor determining the share of apprentices who actually report their disability. So the smaller programs that are exempt from reporting apprentices' disability report disability at the same rate as the larger programs. And when we interviewed inclusive apprenticeship programs and disability rights advocates, one of the things they recommended for the Office of Apprenticeship was to learn from the design features of the Office of Federal Contract Compliance programs voluntary disclosure form to adapt the apprenticeship disclosure form. And so on this slide, I have a picture of that form, and you can see some of the differences between this disclosure form and the Office of Apprenticeship form. In the Office of Federal Contract Compliance form that's on this slide, the form begins by describing why the employee is being asked whether they would like to disclose their disability. It then lists the potential disabilities that the employee might report, and it lists them in a bulleted form so that it's easier to read than in the paragraph in the Office of Apprenticeship form. And then after providing this information to the employee, it asks them to check the box of whether they do have a disability, if they don't have a disability, or if they don't wish to answer. So the structure is different from the Office of Apprenticeship form, and many of our respondents suggested that these are valuable changes that could be made in the apprenticeship system. Now, many of these changes over the course of our project have actually been incorporated into a proposed new version of the Office of Apprenticeship voluntary disclosure form. The Office of Apprenticeship is currently in the final rulemaking stage, so hopefully we'll know more soon about the new version of the voluntary disclosure form. But the proposed version, which is available online, incorporates many of the features that I'm showing on this slide that are already incorporated into the OFCCP form. Okay. Next, I want to turn it over to my colleague Karen to continue to discuss the inclusive apprenticeship programs we spoke with.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay. All right. Hi, I'm Karen Gardiner. I am a white woman with chin-length blonde hair, and I am wearing a black dress with short sleeves. And I am going to introduce you to the inclusive apprenticeship ecosystem. So I'm going to start by reading a quote, which is in a box to the right of this slide. And it says, equitable access to apprenticeship, or intentionally encouraging apprentices who reflect the diversity of the community, is not accomplished by simply providing an open door. In fact, inclusive apprenticeship it's not a single step. It needs to be built into every stage of the apprenticeship. And as you can see from the slide, there are 3 distinct stages. There's program design, there's recruitment and initial engagement or onboarding of the apprentice, and then helping the apprentice persist in the program and complete the program. So this is an overview of what we call the inclusive apprenticeship system, ecosystem, and the various partners. As Daniel mentioned in his introduction to inclusive apprenticeship, partnerships are absolutely critical to inclusive apprenticeships. And so here we have on the left-hand side, the big circle, which says apprenticeship program. This shows the entities that are always part of the apprenticeship. A program cannot exist without these, and that's the sponsor or the employer, the related instruction provider, which could be the employer or it could be a partner, and then the on-the-job learning that is provided by a mentor on site. But a number of partners can help design and implement the apprenticeship program. So starting at the top, we have government partners. You've heard today from the Office of Disability Employment Policy at DOL, so they're a key partner in providing technical assistance and disseminating research about promising practices. There's also the registration agency, which is either the Department of Labor or a state apprenticeship agency, depending on the state. And not only do they help register programs, they can provide technical assistance in designing programs and registering them. There are state and local workforce systems, and that includes the American Job Centers, where employers and job seekers can get services. So these local systems can help design programs, they can help refer clients, or they can refer job seekers. They can also provide funding to support employers and apprentices. And then finally, there is vocational rehabilitation. This is a key partner. They provide a variety of employment services, among others, other services to their clients to help them obtain employment. And they can be involved in many stages, again, helping design the programs, helping design outreach, helping design supportive services, and helping ensure that all the practices in the program are in fact inclusive. So the second group of partners is intermediaries, and you are going to hear from one in a little bit. Intermediaries, broadly speaking, are organizations that provide industry or occupation-specific expertise in a way that can help design programs, they can operate programs or administer them, and they can provide supportive services. So examples of intermediaries are industry associations, workforce boards, labor management partnerships, and community colleges. And then other partners include community-based organizations and advocacy groups. They can play multiple roles. They can refer participants to programs. They can provide supportive services. They can help design and ensure that programs are inclusive. So those are just a few of the partners who are part of this, what we call the inclusive apprenticeship system. So I'm going to talk about the first stage, which is program design, and then I will pass the baton to my colleague Stephanie to talk about the last two stages. But creating and adapting programs to be inclusive actually involves two pieces. There's ensuring that there are employers to provide the apprenticeship, and then designing the program. So on this slide, I'm mentioning or talking to that first point, which is marketing the programs. Thinking back to the big circle on the previous slide, we need employers and sponsors to operate programs. And so how can you bring in more programs, especially in non-traditional industries? As Zach mentioned earlier, there are a lot of construction-related apprenticeships. This is an opportunity to promote apprenticeship to employers in non-traditional industries. So marketing can happen via intermediaries, American Job Centers. They have business service staff who can help introduce employers to apprenticeship, and then vocational rehabilitation also can recruit employers. And here we've talked to, as part of our data collection, a state apprenticeship or state vocational rehabilitation agency director who put in a lot of time and resources, him and his staff, to identifying and educating employers about inclusive apprenticeship, because it was critical to the agency's goal of enrolling 1,000 vocational rehabilitation clients in apprenticeships over a 5-year period. So in terms of a big part of recruiting employers is making sure the message is one that that employers will positively respond to. And here it's very important to make the business case for inclusive hiring. There was one study, for example, that found that employers that were defined as disability inclusion champions had higher revenue, higher net income, and higher profit compared to other employers. So the message is that inclusive hiring practices are very good for your business. Another important message is dispelling the myths or misconceptions around the cost of accommodations. As Daniel mentioned, this is a requirement under Title I for employers of the ADA, for employers that have more than 15 employees. There was an interesting study that found it was by the Job Accommodation Network. It was a survey of employers who found the majority of them had no costs associated with accommodations. And of those who did have a cost, it was a one-time cost with a median price tag of $300. And then there's also funding available through states and other entities. We spoke to one state that provides a tax credit of 10% of a worker's gross wages to employers that hire direct referrals from the state vocational rehabilitation agency. So those are ways to market and encourage employers to adopt apprenticeship. And the next slide looks at creating a program that is inclusive. So here again, it's important to bring in the inclusivity or the ecosystem partners. So for one, intermediaries, again, they comply their subject matter expertise with inclusive practice, and we'll be hearing from one of those shortly. State apprenticeship staff, again, have a role to play in helping employers develop programs. One of the state apprenticeship directors we spoke with is working with an internal team to put together resources for state staff to use in talking to employers about inclusive apprenticeship, its benefits, and how to build inclusivity into all stages. This particular agency director also noted that there is a place for boilerplate language with regard to inclusive apprenticeship. And as she said, we all register standards. Why not provide guidance on inclusivity? And of course, the standards are the very details of the apprenticeship programs. Employers have a role in training mentors. And Stephanie will describe this in a little bit more detail, but the reason that mentors are a critical group here is that because they work so closely one-on-one with apprentices, they might become aware of a potential need for an accommodation, or an employee or apprentice might feel comfortable enough to talk to a mentor about the need for an accommodation. And so it's important that employers and the mentors learn to speak about and understand the policies and processes for requesting accommodations within their particular employment site. And with that, I will pass the baton to my colleague, Stephanie.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Petrov. I'm a research assistant at the Urban Institute. I'm a white woman with long brown hair, and I am wearing a blue shirt and a black blazer. And I will discuss stage 2 and 3 of the inclusive apprenticeship ecosystem. Stage 2 is about the recruitment and initial engagement of apprentices, and I'd like to start by reading a quote on the slide from an IT intermediary we spoke with during interviews for this project. So the quote says, "We don't just say that access is important. By sharing it over and over again, we can reinforce the idea that there's action behind our words." Stage 2, like I said, includes the recruitment and initial engagement of apprentices. As with any hiring process, the employer is central to inclusive recruitment practices, but partners beyond employers can be helpful. I will share a few examples of how partners are involved in the next couple stages of the ecosystem. So creating inclusive job announcements is an important start. Respondents describe 2 important features of inclusive job announcements, which include how the announcement is worded and the nature of job qualifications. In the interviews, ecosystem respondents describe practices for ensuring the language used in job announcements does not discourage people with disabilities from applying. One IT employer said that at a minimum, job announcements should describe the employer's commitment to an inclusive workplace, such as working from home options or flexible schedules. Inclusive job announcements should also reflect relevant skill needs and not a bias towards a college degree. Respondents noted that this bias can prevent otherwise qualified candidates without a degree from applying. Job announcements can also promote inclusivity by highlighting disability affinity networks, mentor programs, and the accommodations process on the employer's website. This allows prospective apprenticeship applicants to access additional information about the employer and their inclusive practices before they apply. Discussions with inclusive apprenticeship respondents identified potential ways employers could reach a broad applicant pool, including using social media, relationships with other partners, and recruiting populations with higher than average disability rates. Respondents recommended disseminating job announcements through social media because it has a broad reach and posts can be shared and reshared with multiple audiences. Collaborating with other ecosystem partners to help get the word out about apprenticeship openings is also a helpful strategy for disseminating job announcements. Like Karen mentioned earlier, vocational rehabilitation agencies are important partners. Since staff at vocational rehabilitation agencies facilitate connections with potential employers, They can be an effective resource to disseminate information about job postings. Respondents also shared that focusing on other populations with higher than average rates of disabilities, including veterans, can expand the pool of applicants with disabilities. About 1 in 3 veterans had a service-connected disability in 2023. We heard that a national bank launched a lead auditor apprenticeship program and prioritized recruiting veterans. Another respondent described an apprenticeship program that trained veterans to be corrections officers. Interviewing and hiring is crucial in any apprenticeship program and provides the first opportunity for apprentices to request an accommodation. The employer is responsible for interviewing and hiring apprentices and then onboarding new apprentices, but other ecosystem partners can also provide input into these processes. Respondents describe good general practices. When scheduling interviews, employers should provide all candidates with information about the interview process, questions, and any skills test required, so applicants can decide if they would like to request accommodations. Additionally, clearly stating how the candidates can request accommodations is also important. Also, conducting interviews virtually so that candidates can choose their own environment is a recommended practice. It's also important to train interviewers and hiring managers on laws restricting disability-related inquiries before a job offer is made. Training on how to reduce unconscious bias during interviews is also important. Ecosystem partners, such as vocational rehabilitation agencies, intermediaries, and advocacy organizations, can work with employers to ensure that interviewers and hiring managers are promoting inclusive interview processes. So the last part of this stage is the onboarding process, which is the first post-interview opportunity for an apprentice to disclose a disability. Employers can create internal structures to encourage self-disclosure. This includes reporting a disability on the voluntary self-disclosure form, as well as disclosure for the purpose of obtaining accommodations. Embedding accommodations in a larger discussion of apprentice support, like job benefits available, is another promising practice. The third and last stage of the inclusive apprenticeship ecosystem is helping apprentices persist in and complete their programs. Strategies to support persistence and completion include offering accommodations to support apprentices during on-the-job learning and related instruction, supporting mentors' ability to advise and provide guidance, promoting the formation of workplace affinity groups, and delivering technical assistance to employers to increase their capacity to bolster inclusivity. It's important to note that many of these practices could be adopted universally, which would enhance the apprenticeship program for all apprentices. Earlier, Daniel described reasonable accommodations. The slide on the screen provides examples of accommodations to help apprentices complete related instruction, on-the-job learning, or both. These accommodations can take the form of academic supports, worksite adjustments and workplace flexibility, and adaptive technology and supportive services. So academic supports can include tutoring and implementing universal design for learning principles into the related instruction, which aims to accommodate all learners, remove potential barriers to learning, and promote greater flexibility in the classroom. Reasonable accommodations can also include worksite adjustments and workplace flexibility. Worksite adjustments can include equipment modifications, chairs, step stools, and adjustable desk ramps to ensure that facilities in the workplace are accessible. Workplace flexibility includes offering remote, hybrid, or part-time work options, as well as schedule flexibility and breaks throughout the workday. Employers can also support apprentices by providing adaptive technology, such as alternative keyboards and mouse interfaces, scanners, screen readers, and software. Helping apprentices access basic needs like housing, childcare, and transportation by offering supportive services or helping apprentices find resources is also important. Overall, respondents we spoke with described the importance of tailoring accommodations to best meet apprentices' specific needs. So an IT intermediary we spoke with said, we encourage all managers and mentors to be familiar with their internal accommodation processes, because often apprentices will disclose to a manager before they would go directly to HR, so it's important that our managers know that information. Karen alluded to this a little bit earlier, but mentors deliver on-the-job learning to apprentices, so they'll always play a significant role in any strategy for making apprenticeships inclusive of disabled workers. Employers can build mentors' capacity to help apprentices thrive by providing training for mentors and other staff members. Training can include guidance on assisting apprentices with disclosing disabilities, requesting accommodations, or finding other resources if necessary. Regular check-ins between apprentices and their mentors can promote resilience through an apprenticeship program. Check-ins provide opportunities for apprentices to share potential barriers they may be facing with a trusted staff member. Also, affinity groups can be a helpful resource. Affinity groups are employer-led groups centered around shared backgrounds, social identities, or life experiences. They can support apprentices with disabilities by helping combat feelings of isolation, facilitating the disability disclosure process, and expanding an apprentice's network of trusted and supportive peers. By supporting affinity groups, employers can demonstrate a commitment to advancing inclusivity in the workplace. Now I'll turn it back to Karen, who will introduce our next speakers.
Thank you, Stephanie. So we have 3 speakers now joining us to talk. 2 of them are talking about different parts of the ecosystem. First, we will have Scott Robertson. He is a senior policy advisor for employment-related supports policy at the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the Department of Labor. Then we will have Jennifer Carlson, who is the co-founder and executive director of Apprenti, who will talk about the intermediary perspective. And we will conclude with Jackson Costa, a senior economist in research and evaluation at ODEP, and he is also the individual overseeing the study. So with that, I will turn it over to Scott.
Great, thank you, Karen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, wonderful. I appreciate the thoughts already shared by my colleagues here on this webinar today. And hello, I'm Dr. Scott Michael Robertson, and I am a senior policy advisor on the Employment-Related Supports, or ERS, policy team here at the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP, at DOL, the U.S. Department of Labor. And I am an autistic person with other significant disabilities and a white man with blue eyes, brown hair, and glasses. I'm wearing a light gray shirt today with a dark navy jacket with fine lines, and the ODEP virtual background appears behind me. And my pronouns are he, him, and his. I would like to share some crucial perspectives to complement what we've already been discussing so far on the modern and evolving national ecosystem for apprenticeship, especially registered apprenticeships, and its relationship to and impact on our work in this space here at ODEP. And as my colleagues here have noted so far, the apprenticeship ecosystem in the United States has been undergoing multiple wonderful changes over the last several years that benefit our work at ODEP. These changes include expanded apprenticeable occupations, greater support for inclusion and access, emerging facilitator and driver policies and practices, including federal policies and practices and state and local policies and practices, and increased apprenticeships in the public sector alongside private industry and opportunities for collaboration and partnership. And our work on inclusive apprenticeships here at ODEP has sought to tap these changes and enhancements to the inclusive apprenticeship ecosystem to benefit expanding access to employment and career pathways. Emerging enhancements in registered apprenticeships and innovative approaches to on-the-job learning and classroom instruction afford tremendous opportunities. These opportunities can help enhance access to fully inclusive employment, good jobs, and careers for diverse career seekers with disabilities. And as Assistant Secretary Williams, who is our Assistant Secretary and head of ODEP here, noted earlier, ODEP has made multiple key investments in the national expanding apprenticeship ecosystem for inclusive apprenticeships to help us capitalize on these emerging priorities for registered apprenticeships. Most recently, our Partnership on Inclusive Apprenticeship Project, or PIA for short, has focused on advancing access to inclusive apprenticeships and career pathways for diverse career seekers, including people with disabilities. PIA has been focusing on how inclusive apprenticeships and related work-based learning can drive roads to good jobs and career pathways for people with disabilities that support greater economic well-being. And the work of the PIA project has built off the great success that we had from ODEP's prior Apprenticeship Inclusion Models Project, or AIM, which partnered with intermediaries from industry to support pilot sites fostering inclusion and access. Notably, ODEP's work on the PIA project has been focusing on aligning our efforts toward multiple emerging priorities and systems changes in the national apprenticeship ecosystem. First, we have capitalized on efforts to expand registered apprenticeship programs for both traditional occupations such as carpentry, plumbing, construction, and occupations in emerging fields in the digital US economy. And PIA has especially focused on the latter of these emerging areas of the economy. And we know that now, as folks have noted, more than 600,000 apprentices now participate in the apprenticeship programs across registered apprenticeship system. And thanks for the data from our colleagues here from the Urban Institute and the Office of Apprenticeship here at DOL. We have a good handle on supporting opportunities for these career seekers. And our work at ODEP has been especially concentrating on several key emerging industry fields in the system. These targeted fields include information technology, or IT, cybersecurity, healthcare, clean and renewable energy, financial services, and other in-demand and growing skilled areas. And modern hiring efforts by employers at businesses and the public sector greatly value talents and honed skills in these and other areas as a recognized equal form of post-secondary education and training that complements our other systems for 4-year and 2-year college degrees. And apprenticeships in these emerging fields also offer greater opportunities to help address the skills gap and help fill positions in industry and in the public sector that can often not be filled by college graduates alone. So it really helps enhance, as they say, economic development, workforce development by having greater apprenticeship support. And considering my own background as a computer information scientist, I believe that I may likely have pursued an apprenticeship in IT information technology myself, as opposed to high school option had I been growing up today. People with significant disabilities like me now have more equal opportunities to participate in apprenticeship to help sharpen our skills and talents as diverse career seekers. Second, for a priority for PIA and our other related work in apprenticeships, industry intermediaries and sponsors of apprenticeship programs, including employers and unions, have increasingly embraced and promoted full inclusion and support for access needs. They have recognized the value and advantages of efforts to ensure inclusion, access, and success for diverse and underrepresented people in apprenticeship programs. This group includes, but is not limited to, people with disabilities, veterans, people from diverse racial and ethnic population groups in the society, LGBTQIA+ people, and many others. And obviously many job seekers come from many of these different diverse groups, including diverse people with disabilities who have these other aspects of their intersectional backgrounds. And so our work through PIA and related work on inclusive apprenticeships have helped intermediaries and program sponsors through technical assistance and outreach and resources that we've created to help support their work to drive universal design for learning, accessible learning, inclusive design supports accessible technology, and support for greater access needs for apprentices, including people with disabilities. And emphasizing success in this area, PIA has helped to promote and support these efforts, as I say, for research, resources, technical assistance, and outreach. And our partnership with several core industry intermediaries has especially helped drive this work. For instance, Apprenti, which is represented on this webinar currently has been one of our partners for PIA. And we have also collaborated with unions, service providers, and provided outreach, as I say, collaboration and engaged in partnership with unions, service providers, educational providers, and other organizations in this national ecosystem, and released resources such as our quick guide on fostering inclusive apprenticeships and a design guide on designing inclusive apprenticeship programs, and many other resources such as for apprentices themselves. Third, our apprenticeship work at ODEP for PIA and related efforts has sought to align itself with the ecosystem changes to policy and practices for inclusive apprenticeships. Most notably, we have helped advance efforts to support priorities under the Federal Good Jobs Initiative and key policies. These key policies include, for instance, apprenticeship-focused executive orders. Most notably in March, the Biden-Harris administration released Executive Order 14119 and scaling and expanding the use of registered apprenticeships in industries in the federal government and promoting labor management forums. Likewise, we have also helped support apprenticeship priorities and activities in the ecosystem that are connected to recent laws, such as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. These laws emphasize jobs and careers in the emerging fields in the digital US economy that I mentioned earlier. Laws are also helping us grow greater opportunities for economic advancement for apprenticeships, related work-based learning, and efforts to support good jobs and inclusive career pathways. Fourth, our apprenticeship work at ODEP has also emphasized the growing efforts in the national ecosystem to expand apprenticeships for a job entry point and upskilling in the public sector. By public sector, I mean both local and state government and the federal government, since apprenticeships in the public sector greatly complement apprenticeships in private industry. We value how registered apprenticeships in the public sector can help us improve access for diverse job seekers, including people with disabilities, to good jobs and career pathways in government. And finally, our work on inclusive apprenticeships, as I mentioned, has also gained from our engagement, collaboration, and outreach for the wealth of intermediaries from industry, unions, employer service providers, and educators that help lift up and drive our work in this expanding enhanced ecosystem and create greater opportunities in employment and careers to support economic well-being for diverse people with disabilities. So as I said, we've had a wealth of changes, and it really has helped drive our work and support the mission at ODEP to improve access to gainful, inclusive employment opportunities and careers for diverse people with disabilities. Thanks. And I think I turn it, Karen, do I turn it back over to you?
To Jennifer.
So I've turned it over to Jennifer. Thank you. Jennifer is now speaking about the work over at Apprenti.
Thank you very much, Scott. We appreciate your support, and we appreciate Urban Institute having us here today. My name is Jennifer Carlson. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of Apprenti. We are an intermediary working in partnership with the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Personnel, or ODEP, and we serve in this role on a national footprint. I am a Caucasian woman who is brown hair pulled back and wearing red framed glasses, a brown sweater, and brown jacket. My pronouns are she and her, and I am with a disability myself. I am half deaf, and I am on the autism spectrum. So we are here to talk about what this does for you and the kind of culmination of all of the work that you've heard about going into disabilities and how to include them in apprenticeships and how to make reasonable accommodation. Our role as an intermediary is to serve both the employer and the apprentice and supporting them through a process that makes them successful coming into their role within your company. My function is specifically in IT. We serve companies across the country for IT, aerospace and aviation, and cyber roles. And we have over 300 employers that we work with, very large employers at the enterprise level, all the way down to small and mid-sized employers. And 80 to 20, it's an 80-20 rule, I should say. 80% of our employers are taking net new talent that we work in the marketplace to bring to the table. And 20% are existing employees within those companies that the company is looking to upskill or reskill into a higher or more significant role. Of the placements that we do, the range is between 11 and 15% that self-report as having a disability. From the employer side, that means that an accommodation has to be made, and those folks are actively seeking some kind of accommodation or even just a simple assistance in getting through their apprenticeship. More often than not, you'd be surprised to know that they're looking for learning development plans. They're looking for assistance in working with their employer on getting an accommodation that helps them through their apprenticeship with learning on the job. And our team functions in support of that and works directly with the apprentice to craft that, modify when necessary the classroom curriculum, and help transition them into job and support the mentor that they work with in their apprenticeship. So we are able to coach the mentor, coach the apprentice, and get that person into a place that they can be successful and be retained in their job at the end of the apprenticeship. These services are provided at no cost. They're supported by the U.S. Department of Labor as a function of what we do to support employers adopting apprenticeship. And we work with a wide range of state agencies on behalf of the employer and the apprentice as well. That includes voc rehab offices, workforce boards, and others, including the VA, to ensure that the support that the apprentice needs is available to them, whether that's transportation, therapy, or other ergonomics while they're on job. And the number one growing area that we have being reported to us is in the neurodiversity space. They're looking for support for autism spectrum. The apprentices, ADHD, PTSD are the most frequently requested. And sometimes it can be as simple as helping to educate the employer about what that kind of assistance needs to look like for them. Hence, going back to what I said around learning development plans. Accommodation can be any range of things. And one thing we do talk to employers about and make recommendations on is the ability for the apprentice to work remotely. Even as we hear many companies trying to revisit the return to work policies, there is no greater location for a person with a disability to work than in their own space that's already constructed around them to support their disability. So that is an easy best practice that we like to share with employers and can be an easier accommodation perhaps than some others they consider. When we create or we recruit net new talent, that means we're bringing all people to the table, and persons with disabilities cover all spectrums. We ask these questions and do that survey that you saw earlier in the presentation at the very beginning of the apprenticeship. So they're choosing to opt in and disclose, and going back to the comments that were made about making clear that this is an accommodation that you are comfortable with and that this is something we're openly talking about, means that we're putting meaning behind it. And apprentices know that it is now a welcome environment to have that conversation. Hence the reason that our upper end of 15% is significantly over-indexing what is traditionally reported in the marketplace. Our team does that work in concert with the apprentice, the training provider that does the classroom training, or the RTI, required technical instruction, and the employer. And we can support that all the way through the apprenticeship, not only at the start of the program, but for the full duration of that program, working with those employers and the individuals. The learning development plans can apply both on job as well as in classroom. And this is also as much about skills-based hiring and how we define skills, and that sometimes those skills are influenced from a diversity standpoint that can be a value proposition to the employer, not only because of how they look at things differently, but helping to also make accessibility part of the workplace environment for everyone else. We are so happy to support this work. We work with a number of other contractors in the space, and all of the contractors for the U.S. Department of Labor have the capacity to support this. So this is not an IT sector only deliverable. This is something that can work in healthcare, building and trades, and transportation services, and others. If you need that assistance, feel free to reach out to either myself or to Scott at ODEP, and we can connect you with the appropriate party. And with that, I will hand it over to Jackson.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackson Costa, and I'm a senior economist at the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and I oversee this project. I'm a South Asian male with black hair and brown eyes, and I'm currently wearing a white shirt with blue stripes and clear glasses. First and foremost, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the Urban Institute team for their exceptional work in organizing this insightful session. I also want to thank each of you for your engaging with us as we explore strategies to enhance inclusivity in apprenticeship programs. Our discussions today have been incredibly enlightening. We've covered a range of topics, from the importance of inclusive program design to the practical steps needed to implement these strategies effectively. It's clear that making apprenticeship programs more inclusive is not just a matter of policy, but of commitment to creating real, tangible opportunities for everyone. One of the key takeaways from today's session is the need for a multifaceted approach. Ensuring that apprenticeship programs are inclusive involves not just removing barriers to access, but also creating an environment where every participant feels valued and supported. This includes improving self-identification of disability status, addressing potential biases, and providing resources and support that cater to the diverse needs of apprentices. Looking ahead, the Department of Labor is excited about several new initiatives and study aimed at advancing inclusive apprenticeship programs. Across many of our agencies, the department is leading efforts to rigorously assess the effectiveness of these programs and identify areas for improvement. These evaluations will be crucial in shaping future policies and practices, ensuring that apprenticeship systems are not only inclusive, but also effective in meeting the needs for all participants. In addition to these efforts, we're also working on enhancing our data collection methods. As you all are aware, accurate data is essential for understanding the true impact of our programs and for making informed decisions about future initiatives. We need comprehensive data on disability status and other factors to better tailor our programs and support services. Today's webinar has also highlighted the importance of collaboration. Partnerships between organizations, employers, and policymakers are vital for creating and sustaining inclusive apprenticeship programs. By working together, we can share best practices, address common challenges, and really drive innovation in our program design. As we move forward, let's keep in mind the broader impact of our efforts. Inclusive apprenticeship programs are not just about expanding opportunities for individuals with disabilities, they're about enriching the entire workforce. And research has shown that companies investing in these programs often see significant returns, and not only in the terms of financial performance, but also in employee satisfaction and retention. I encourage each of you to take the insights and strategies shared today and apply them in your own work. Your efforts are crucial in building a more inclusive and equitable workforce. By continuing to focus on inclusivity and collaboration, we can create apprenticeship programs that truly benefit everyone. With that, thank you once again for your participation and dedication to this important cause. I'll now turn it back over to the Urban team.
Thank you, Jackson. I think we have a few minutes to answer questions. If you are interested or have some questions, I guess please put them in the Q&A. I believe the presentation will be available on the site. Could somebody in the communications team confirm that?
Yeah, the slides are on the event page. That's been answered in the answer column.
Okay.
And it looks like Robin has a question for Apprentice.
Let's see. Let's see. The question, Robin has a question for Apprentice. Jennifer, do you want to take that one?
Certainly. I cannot see the question though.
Oh, the question is, does Apprentice offer trainings for apprenticeship training reps, providing examples of rep occupation-specific accommodations for some of the commonly identified disabilities? Or perhaps have infographics related to information for specific occupations or specific disabilities?
We do, and I'd be happy to supply those if you want to either email me. Actually, the easiest way is to email me and I'll connect you with Marie Trudell and Emma McLean on my team who do all of the consultations on this.
Okay, and the emails are here on the slide. it looks like, can I receive a copy of the presentation, and answer is being typed in. Then we have a question. How have been the efforts to spread awareness and support neurodivergent people in non-apprenticeship roles, traditionally white collar roles? I don't know if Scott or Jennifer, you want to take that?
Yeah,
question?
I could help answer that, and then Jennifer, if you want to add to that as well. So we have some major priorities for supporting neurodiversity at work that really align with supporting job and career opportunities for apprenticeships, other forms of work-based learning to support good jobs and career opportunities for neurodivergent people, such as autistic people, people with ADHD, other cognitive differences and in processing. And some of this is driven by priorities under, for instance, our Autism Cares Act on the autism specific kind of end of things for supporting greater opportunities in life and economic and career well-being for autistic people, and other emerging priorities that we've had here in the federal government that are often influenced by work out there in industry and state and local government that helps shape our work here at the national level to increase opportunities for, as I say, autistic people and other neurodivergent people. And Jennifer, I don't know if you want to note too that you have emphasized too that how often neurodivergent people increasingly have represented one of the larger groups among people with disabilities overall in apprenticeships. And I will say in many manners too, historically the space for apprenticeships was more limited, as we noted, but it's growing more to apprenticable occupations. So almost anything can be apprenticable. So there are a lot of roles that may have been seen as non-apprenticeship type roles, but could actually be supported by apprenticeship with the right adjustments to them, and support access inclusion with the right accommodations folks need to be successful, including for neurodivergent people. But I'll throw it over to Jennifer so you can talk about your work at Apprenti to support neurodivergent people.
Yeah, as I said during my portion, I think the majority of the work has been on the learning development plan side. It's been making accommodation in the classroom structure. And sometimes the amount of time allocated, or how we break up the different learning segments instead of them kind of being blended. And not that we will segment them, but we'll restructure the time allocated in different portions of the work. There was a question about how we do that work or what work we've seen done outside of apprenticeship roles. And I cannot speak for where the employers do the accommodation. What I can say is there are a number of large employers, enterprise level, that have done pilot and test programs around hiring people specifically with autism or people who are specifically ADHD, and putting them in a different managerial and mentored group to do specific job tasks, and have expressed or shown really high adaptive skill in the data analytics and the software development tracks. And things that are highly process and repetitive seem to be of good structure for them. The key is how the company chooses to manage them. And you typically have to have a high functioning person in the same position to manage that group, who can really be empathetic to the challenges that they can experience. Having a non-neurodivergent person managing neurodivergent people can be very challenging. And I think, Scott, you can probably speak to that more directly.
Yeah, I think having folks both in leadership and non-leadership, like in terms of managerial positions, and I guess positions we often called sort of more worker bee kind of things that are non-managerial, I think is really it's the space is benefited by having that diversity in terms of the thinking and processing from both neurodivergent people and non-neurodivergent people in this space, with supports for their advancement, you know, in industry and the public sector, as far as supporting neurodiversity at work and access for apprenticeships, especially, for instance, for upskilling, as well as entry point for neurodivergent people. And I also want to emphasize too, and I know there's a question also on accommodations, and I just wanted to address it first for neurodiversity and then overall, is that we also have resources from our ODEP Employer Assistance and Resource Network on Disability Inclusion, or EARN, askEARN.org, and our Job Accommodation Network, JAN, J-A-N, askjan.org. You can find wealth of resources at those sites that's specific to neurodiversity at work overall, and for instance, supporting mental health in the workplace, and how that dovetails with employment and career support and work-based learning, including for inclusive apprenticeships. And it also mentions, so for this question, it asked about common requested accommodations, and Jan, for instance, can help folks with brainstorming workplace accommodations that help support greater success. But I know that often having, for instance, flexibility in learning, more accessible technology and tools support, different kind of adjustments that help folks in terms of participate in a way that makes sense for their own abilities and talents and reduces challenges and barriers are some of the more often commonly requested accommodations, as I say, sometimes accessible and assistive technology. Jennifer, would you like to emphasize that more too? What kind of accommodations have you seen as far as in apprenticeships that are commonly requested?
Most commonly requested are the traditionals. It's a combination of ergonomics, transportation, modified transportation, and we'll usually partner with workforce boards to create something that is a combination of employer and workforce board supported to get them to job rather than traditional transportation means. Those are probably the top two. I would also add, there was a question in here about, do we work with outreach to union and joint apprenticeship programs? We are a joint non-union program, and we are absolutely happy to do outreach and work with any union programs that are looking for assistance on this front.
Jennifer, there's a question also on transition age high school students. Is that a group that you work with?
18 and over. So the youngest we've placed is 18. The eldest we've placed is 65. And median age in our program is 31, but we will do transition assistance coming out of high school and looking for alternatives to college track.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note too also that CAPE Youth, which is our Technical Assistance and Policy Development Center here at ODEP for youth and young adults, including people with disabilities, capeyouth.org. You can find a wealth of additional resources there. And thank you, Jennifer, also for highlighting the emphasis on transportation. From my perspective as a non-driver, a lot of people with more significant disabilities, including many neurodivergent people like myself, need access to public transit for being able to access apprenticeship programs or having like vans, et cetera. So I'm really glad they emphasized that and other related supports that help ensure full participation by folks who, may have challenges in that space. And even, as I say, on the transportation and even reaching the apprenticeship to participate on site, because a lot of, some of this is done virtually, but a lot of this is often done in person for the on-the-job learning and inclusive and the classroom instruction component as well.
And there is a question here about inclusivity on college campuses. And I think with the related instruction, a lot of that is provided by colleges. Scott, is there resources on that?
Yeah, and that's another area where, as I say, our youth policy team through its CAPE Youth Center that I mentioned, capeyouth.org, you can find some resources on the higher education end, and we value that's especially two-year colleges and increasingly sometimes four-year college universities have partners on supporting inclusive apprenticeship access, and yeah, they're under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. As students, they also have equal access to accommodations from their educational experience, equal access to education for the classroom learning component, to make sure that apprentices with disabilities, from their student perspective, can have equal access to the learning, right? To enhance their the skills that they're learning, to support where the apprenticeship is driving their employment opportunities for good jobs. So yeah, there is an emphasis on the school end, and it really dovetails with the broader work we've looked at as far as for inclusivity in the higher education space, post-secondary education and training overall, and where apprenticeship fits into that space right now in more modern times, especially increasingly more so than it did maybe 20 years ago, where, as I say, the whole entire apprenticeship system has expanded and really complemented opportunities in post-secondary education and training for youth and young adults coming out of high school who are of transition age.
All right.
Oh, and the other thing I should note too is that our youth team has also previously run demonstration projects from the college campus and again on the 2-year college focus. So we have work in that space that's enhanced opportunities, and I believe some of that is emphasized again at that capeyouth.org website.
And I just put that website in the chat.
Great,
so
thank you.
we can have that. There's also a question about examples of employers using inaccessible software programs that are not easily replaced with an alternative accessible one.
Yeah, I could help address that too, is that on the accessibility end too, is one of the things we promoted for our work in Inclusive Apprenticeships is a related work on accessibility of technology and tools. And we do also have another Technical Assistance and Policy Development Center, the Partnership on Employment Accessible Technology, or PEAT, P-E-A-T, peatworks.org. And you can find a wealth of resources there as well on supporting accessibility. And there are many resources there for supporting employers, service providers, other organizations for ensuring full accessibility. And in this case, on apprenticeships, for both the on-the-job learning and the classroom component, you need to have accessibility of the tools and technologies that you use for the learning on the job and the classroom to ensure full access by people with disabilities and, frankly, other diverse and underrepresented learners who may need both support from accessibility and the emphasis on priorities for things like universal design for learning, so that these tools and technologies support diverse learning styles. But again, you go to peatworks.org, you can find more about our work of supporting accessibility that's interrelated to this for access to technology and tools for work-based learning and employment.
Okay, we have another question here. How do you see the role of access to transit-oriented development, housing, on increasing the labor force participation of people with disabilities to good jobs and apprenticeship programs?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's another one of our emerging areas that thank you for reminding me that I didn't know earlier, is that both folks need good transportation to access apprenticeships and related workspace learning for supporting job opportunities, but the transportation sector also is offering an opportunity that we've increasingly focused on as well here at ODEP, and jobs in that area are expanding and including for diverse and underrepresented people, including people with disabilities. And this is also where, for instance, the laws that I noted earlier, particularly the bipartisan infrastructure law, has emphasized apprenticeships for supporting opportunities in infrastructure building here for projects funded by that law across the country, and transportation especially is one of the major priorities in that area for growing our transportation systems, including public transit across cities in the United States, where a lot of cities have tried to have more modernized transportation systems here now, especially with funding from that law and other priorities. And apprenticeships definitely offer a great opportunity for supporting transit system development. So as I say, it's dual kind of focus of both career opportunities in transportation, and then transportation to get out to apprenticeship sites. Both are major priorities for us.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So there's another related to neurodivergent. The question is how have there been efforts in working neurodivergent people into the field of education? I've noticed that the education field, K through 12 educators who are neurodivergent, often are seen as unfit, yet ADA and IDEA often requires schools to provide supports. Do you think this is something that should be explored at a legislative area to encourage neurodivergent people to be educators? You're on mute, Scott.
Whoops, sorry about that. I definitely concur with that. Apprenticeships in that teaching educational space are additional area that we've been looking to in recent times, and has been emphasized, for instance, by the advisory committee on apprenticeship here at the Department of Labor. And I definitely value opportunities for people with disabilities, including neurodivergent people, to become teachers. I believe that people with disabilities, including neurodivergent people like myself, can work in all jobs across the economy in the United States that fit our skills, interests, strengths, and talents. And yes, I think that the K-12 system and systems beyond K-12 have historically not emphasized people with significant disabilities, including neurodivergent people, such as autistic people, in becoming teachers in the K-12 level and in higher education as well. And I think that's something where inclusive apprenticeships can support opportunities in that space, I think, to become teachers, educators, and having access needs and supports met through accommodations and accessible technology, including with ideas, as I say, from the Job Accommodation Network, AskJan.org, to brainstorm accommodation supports for folks to be successful in apprenticeships focused on teaching, and to have jobs, as I say, in special education, general education, and higher education. It should be valued more than it has been historically. But I think we're making great progress in that space. And I think increasingly I've seen and heard of success stories for neurodivergent people and other people with disabilities to become teachers and educators. So I think that's something we can and will be promoting more, is success in that space for folks, and as a great opportunity here in the country to have more educators that frankly reflect the diversity of folks in America, including people with disabilities. And it's good for students to have folks from diverse experiences as their educators, including people with disabilities like myself.
Okay, I think we're almost at time. Haley, could you put the final slide up with the resources and where to find them? So there are a number of project publications. Some of them have been released, others are in the clearance or review process. You can find them on the Urban Institute website, or and also at the U.S. Department of Labor. There are 4 briefs that are listed here, and there will be a final report that kind of ties together everything that we talked about today. So check the websites, and those will be coming on a rolling basis. So with that, I thank everyone for attending, and I thank all of the speakers for participating and for answering, especially Scott and Jennifer, for answering lots of questions at the end. So thank you again to everyone who attended, and look forward to meeting again at some point. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karen, and everyone.
Thanks, everyone.